All right. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Grace Scheipeter. I'm an editor at Oni Press, and I'll be moderating today's panel. Our guests today are Jonathan Hill and François Vigneault, who will be leading a conversation about creating comics and about some of the two of their upcoming books that are going to be released from Oni Press next month. So first, I will introduce Jonathan. His graphic novel, Odessa, is set to release in early November. Jonathan is an award-winning cartoonist who lives in Portland, Oregon. His comics and works have been featured in places like Fantagraphics, Lionforge, Tor.com, Powell City of Books, The Believer magazine, and the Society of Illustrators. His first two books, Americus and Wild Weather, were created with writer M.K. Reed and published by First Second. Jonathan also teaches comics at the Pacific Northwest College of Art and serves on the board of directors at Literary Arts. Odessa is the first book he's written and drawn himself. I'll give Jonathan a chance to talk more about Odessa here in a second, but before that, I'd like to introduce our second guest, François. And he is the creator of the upcoming graphic novel, Titan, which is also set to be released early next month. He's a freelance cartoonist, illustrator, and designer. In addition to Titan, he has works that include Orcs in Space and 13E Avenue, which was the winner of the Prix de Librairie Award for Best Youth Comic. His work has appeared in publications like Cyril's Ring, Planches Paper Cutter, Kayak, and Study Group Magazine. His work has been nominated for plenty of awards, including the Joe Shuster Award and the Prix de College Award. Born in the US to immigrant parents, he now lives and works in Montreal, Quebec, and has been there since 2015. So for this panel, we're going to talk a lot about these two books coming up. We're going to give both of them a chance to tell us a little bit more about them, ask each other questions, and just get to know these authors better in general. I'll be here to sprinkle in some questions and help keep things going. But to kick us off, how about we start and just hear a little bit more about these two books coming out next month? Who would like to start?
Well, thank you, Grace. It's nice to see you guys both. It's funny to be doing these kind of long distance things, but it's cool that we get to connect even though we're very far apart. So I was reading a really cool book the other day. It was a science fiction book, featured a very strong female protagonist, had really cool, immersive, black and pink and white artwork. But enough about my book, Titan. John, I'd like to hear about your book, Odessa, that has all those things in common with it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'm really excited to be doing this because, I mean, you were in Portland for a long time, and I felt like our social circles were like kind of butted up against each other, and I think we know a lot of the same people, but we kind of never really have gotten a chance to sit down and talk, and so it's kind of nice, I mean, years later to kind of have that chance now. But you know, as I was reading your book too, it is interesting to me how there are so many similarities, not just visually, but I think just kind of like if you underneath the hood, kind of there's so many things that I found similar reading Titan too. But I guess you asked me first, so I'll talk about Odessa first. That was sneaky. That was a pretty sneaky trick. But so Odessa is it is a YA post-apocalyptic story about three siblings searching for their estranged mother, and that's sort of, I don't know about you, but it's taken me a long time to iron down that like pitch or that synopsis into like a streamlined sentence. But I mean, essentially, like, yes, it's kind of, the backdrop has this sort of like, you know, basically the ruins of California. This giant earthquake has split California into two parts and created a strait, and they're searching for their mother, and their uncle, who they will hope will lead to their mother. And but really it's about family. It's about sort of that feeling when your parents leave or someone leaves you and it just kind of destroys your world, and this sort of fantasy of like being able to kind of leave and search for that. And so that's kind of the core of Odessa. So I guess I'll ask you about Titan now. Can you let's see how your pitch is. How have you managed to iron that down?
Oh, it's definitely worse than yours for sure. But I think most authors we're always being put on the spot to do the log line or the pitch, but we just have to learn to do our best. My book is about two people from literally different worlds, one from the Earth and one from the moon of Titan, and they find themselves caught in the sort of the maelstrom of a nascent rebellion on the moon of Titan about 200 years from now. And a little fly in the ointment there is that all the workers who work on Titan have been genetically engineered to live there and work in the harsh conditions there. So they're all giants, and all their managers and the security and everybody, those are all people from the Earth. And so it's like a class conflict and racial conflict, caste conflict, kind of writ large, with this like big overriding metaphor on top of it all. And hopefully it all works as a kind of a fun adventure story, but I definitely had some things to say about the world and the way we, some of our underlying problems that we have in our different societies. And so that was my basic idea behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like that was pretty good. And I think that yours there are so many elements into it that to kind of be able to sum that up in a pretty clear synopsis was pretty, I'm impressed. I was very impressed.
Well, we'll see. We'll see how impressed the world is, but I'm glad that I got you. That's good.
Well, I guess if it's okay, I'll kind of ask a question about, there are so many elements in Titan, from the sort of just like the science fiction backdrop, the sort of like working class, the systemic challenges that are kind of built into the system in the science fiction world, the character relationships. I guess maybe I'd like to know, and I feel like I'm like, oh, I want to dig deep and ask these gritty questions, but at the same time, I'm really curious just to know, like, where did the idea for that? Because I know you've been working on that for a while. Because I think I saw it in mini comics.
Yeah.
And so just like where did the idea for that start, and where, like, was it the backdrop first? Was it wanting to kind of tackle the sort of like, socioeconomic ideas first, the characters, like where did you kind of start with it, or where did the idea come from?
Yeah, well, and it's kind of funny because they all kind of mixed in. I think I do a lot of my work is very improvisational, and I'm kind of always like recreating or like rewriting, undoing, redoing things. But the most basic idea was, it's almost like a stupid idea in a way. I was thinking, what if there were giant people? What would that be like? And it was actually like it was inspired because one day I was walking around and I saw two dogs like hanging out like the way dogs do, but it was really funny. Like one of them was like a tiny little Chihuahua or something like that, and the other was like like a big Great Dane or something. And I was just looking at them. I was like, wow, those two. It's so interesting because like their relationship is. What is their relationship with each other? Like, how do they view each other? Because they're both the same species. They're almost genetically identical, but they've been like modified through human interaction over thousands of years to be completely different from each other. And so it was just like this very basic idea. I was like, what if there were big people? And then then from there, I sort of kind of just created, a setting, a backdrop that would allow me to explore that in some sort of reasonable way. Because, I could have done like a fantasy novel or something like that. But I've always been, for the last couple decades or so, I've been more interested. I grew up reading a lot of fantasy novels and things like that. But more recently, I've been really interested in kind of like science fiction and the way it can kind of connect with the real world. Like, right, like for instance, as you were saying, in Odessa is like in California, in Oregon, like after the big one, like a giant earthquake on the Cascadia Fault, right? And so that's kind of interesting, right? There's like a real literal connection with like the world that we live in right now. And I like that through line. And so I wanted to find a way to do that. And so I kind of created this sort of fuzzy logic, soft, hard sci-fi thing where, they work on the moon of Titan. And so they live in low gravity. So they've been engineered to live there. And then from there, I just was able to kind of connect the dots. I was thinking, okay, like, well, like, why are they there? They're the workers. And then like, that allowed me to explore all sorts of things with, with our collective history, with like work, class conflict, different racial hierarchies, all kinds of things like that. How about for you go ahead.
Oh, no, I guess something that I was just going to mention, it's not really a question, but, it's just interesting to me when things, it's, just that idea of like, systemic oppression, like it's built in, and having like, I don't want to say it's topical, because realistically it's been topical for forever, right?
Yeah.
But just now, I think in sort of the climate when it is kind of like bringing to the surface, like I think with, here we're doing this remotely, like you said, it's great that we can do that, but it also, like, I think something that's been huge about the last 7 months, 7 months now, is it's brought to the surface so many of these things that, like, oh, these systems that we have, maybe they're not the best systems, like they're not working, they're built, and so it's just, I always think it's interesting when, I mean, I know you've been working on this for a long time, and to have it kind of come out at a time when it ends up being it's not like you set out making it sort of a hot topic issue, or I want to tackle this subject and I'm going to use sci-fi, but just like, and again, I don't mean to say that, oh, this isn't the only time to be thinking about it, but I think it is really interesting. And I think it's just going to be that much more powerful at a time when we are just being shown again that, like, the system is built to not provide us any rights, especially people that are underrepresented, and like, I feel like there's someone more intelligent who would be able to ask the question a little bit better about just like this idea too of like having to fight, not the spoilers or anything, but like, we have to fight for any rights that we want, because the system is built to not give us those rights. And like, was that something that you had really thought about, or had you looked a lot at sort of like some sort of like maybe, workers' rights or civil rights, or, like disabled rights, or kind of these things that are kind of woven into, I of course, I only really know American history, but was that part of sort of the making of it and the research in that too?
I mean, absolutely. I was kind of looking, I kind of looked all over the place. I've been sort of like a history buff my whole life, and I'm really interested, and like we all grew up with like or at least like the people who were like born or raised in the United States, we grew up with like these stories of like the American Revolution and things like that. And then there's like often like a more complicated history underneath that history that we sort of have to teach ourselves, depending on how old we are and things like that, so it's like, I don't know, like I remember, it's like that classic thing where you read Howard Zinn, The People's America, History of the United States of America, or, but then also just like looking at like the way that, like people have like fought for their rights or fought against the powers that be, or also and then also the ways that unfortunately sometimes those fights don't always go like the way that you want them to, like there are a lot of revolutionary movements that end up also being oppressive or end up like betraying like the ideals that they stood for, from like, and I mean like the jury's out on all of them, right? Like I'm not like going to make a judgment on any of them, but like if you take the French Revolution, the revolution in Haiti, like in Cuba, things like that, like there's a lot of like different conflicting groups within each revolution, and so that it's not usually a straight story. And for me, that was always something I was really interested in. I'm always interested in like the kind of the human scale and the human element in like, say, a big story, right? I mean, it's a little bit like what you're doing in Odessa too, right? Like you're telling one of the biggest stories possible that you could tell, right? Like the story of like the earthquake that destroys the west coast of America, like reshapes the literal like ground beneath people's feet, changes everything. But it's also just an intimate story of a family, of a sister and two brothers who go in search of their mother, and it's that like human scale that I think I've always found that to be really interesting. Well, tell me a little bit about the inspirations that come from with Odessa. Like, where did that come from?
So, I mean, I think I've been working on, I think I signed, with Oni like 5 years ago. So it took me 5 years to do this, to do the process of it. But I think it started a lot longer ago. I had just finished my first book with MK Americus, and she had another book lined up, ready to go. And I was very like panicky. I was like, oh my God, I don't have anything, like, and I had been offered to work on a book, but I turned it down because I wanted to work it on myself. But every idea I had, it kind of like what you're saying, it had maybe like a concept that I was like, oh, that's clever, like that'll work. But it didn't have that human element. It didn't have the heart to it. And so I just kept like, I just kept scrapping and nothing felt right. And then, actually at the around the time my sister-in-law was getting divorced. And I feel bad saying like, oh, the inspiration of my book was my sister-in-law's divorce. But what it did is I saw my nieces and my nephew. I just saw the struggle that they had with that, and literally like, you know, it was their whole world had changed. You could see their attitudes changing about that, how much it was affecting them, how difficult it was for them, and it reminded me of what it was like when my mom left. And it was a very dramatic, I mean, you know, this is years ago. If mom watches it, you know, I'm not upset. I'm very close with my mother, you know, everything, but it's just like she left in the middle of the night.
Okay.
And it was a lot of drama to it. And it was this thing. And you know, like we had to learn how to, obviously we didn't have to like some other people have to, but like we had to kind of survive, you know, in little ways. Like we had to learn to cook, do our laundry, chores, take care of ourselves, like, you know, like, and it was just this, kind of the same thing of just this idea of like, you know, I just saw them going through that. And then I remembered my experience, and I just remember it's kind of, you know, kind of stupid or kind of like, oh, this metaphor of like when your world is destroyed and someone leaves you. I think anytime you get left, when you get dumped, when someone dies, when you have a friend break up, like I feel like they just kind of happen, and you have so many questions, and you never get answers to those questions. And this idea of like, you know, remembering when I was a kid and wanting to like search for get answers, and you know, and so that's kind of where it, you know, and then I think that's what I think is so interesting about us talking, is just to see how even the ideas and sort of the way that we work and the way that we think have so much in common. It's actually like, I just think it's really interesting, because I think too, like I, you know, grew up reading like science fiction and fantasy and you know, things like that, and just, you know, there's also this running joke, I think, you live in California, or like, you know, and it's just like, oh, this will be beachfront property sometime when the big one hits and it like goes into the ocean. And so when I was looking at like world building and things like that, I was like, well, I can just take this dumb joke and like I'll make it like the reality of the book. And how does the world then what world exists inside of that, that they have to kind of come across and things like that. So
right, it's the end of Lex Luthor's plot. Remember, he he's gonna like flood the world or what have you.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's really interesting, because science fiction basically, and fantasy too, it's sort of like taking a metaphorical approach to the world and the problems of the world, and then also just the emotional reality of the world. And I think that's kind of interesting, because I think that's quite powerful what you're saying, where you're taking like something that's clearly emotionally very true and real for you, you know, like the split up of your parents, your mother leaving, like that sense of abandonment that you have as a child, and then learning how to redo things, and then also that search for answers. I think that was the original title of the book, wasn't it? Something like The Searchers.
It was called The Searchers, and I knew that it was like you know, old John Ford Western, but I just like it kind of made me think of like, you know, The Rescuers, or even just, I love the simplicity in these titles, but I think that we were just like, that's going to be a marketing headache, let's come up with something else. And then I just ended up, you know, I was really happy with the title we ended up coming up with. But yeah, just this idea of like searching, like, because that's what it's about, it's about searching for answers, you know. So
that's I find that really interesting. Well, actually, since you mentioned that, you know, that I lived on the West Coast for most of my life. I lived in California or in Oregon for almost all my life. And it's really true. It's like the like that sense of the earthquake is like, it's coming. You've lived through it. You've lived through earthquakes in the past, and then there's always the sense that there's like the big one is coming. You know, and we sort of scientifically know that that's probably extremely true, no matter what. And like, so, like, your book is not like a realistic look at like, you know, like earthquake preparedness or anything, but like are you concerned? Like, do you have like a go bag like on the corner of your studio there, or?
You know, I'll admit that like it's impossible for me to think big picture like that, because that's just like too, like, I'm just like, that's so big of a worry. Like I have so many other worries that are like right in front of me that I don't. And so, you know, honestly, like I have some friends, like I have a friend that is super into it. Like she took like ham radio training. She has like, she's involved in her like neighborhood, like preparedness. And what's sad is that I should, because like I have some like health issues. I had to have a kidney transplant a long time ago. And, we like part of me having that we had to make a to-go like a preparedness like dialysis bag to go, like food,
Right.
medicine, all that stuff. And you know, it was one of those things that every time the nurse would ask if I had it ready, I was like, yeah, like, you know, I don't know. So maybe I should probably be more prepared. I would be honest that selfishly my concern was just like, please don't happen before my book about the big Cascade earthquake comes out. That's all I want. That's the tiny prayer that I have. So I wasn't quite, yeah. So I guess I'm not really as prepared as I should be.
Well, I mean, as you mentioned, it is so wild. Like both of us have our books coming out. I think November 10th, November 11th, depending on what bookstore. And me, I remember when the you know, like, because it was originally September, it got moved around a little bit. I was like, oh wow, what world is this book going to come out into, right? Like, and it's like it feels the same sort of way where there could be like a literal, not literal, but a figurative earthquake, you know, like in our world. And I feel it's so strange. How do you feel about writing something that's in the world of science fiction and speculative fiction? When I don't think it's an exaggeration to say, but it does feel like our world is in sort of uncharted territory, like, you know, between like, you know, like a global pandemic that's like totally like transformed and shut down the global economy. We can't travel anymore, things like that. Like an election that is, I would say is no exaggeration to say is quite intense and seems to be like by the minute getting wilder and wilder. The protest for social justice in the streets and like the blowback from that. The tension seems to be so high, and we seem to just be in a space that I just don't know where we are anymore. Like, how does it feel to be releasing a book? Like, A, it's your first book that you wrote and drew together, and then B, it's like something. It's post-apocalyptic fiction. It's something about like communities, like the building and breaking of communities, and just like the idea of like wondering about the future. Like, how does that feel to be releasing it right now?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, honestly, it gives me a little bit of anxiety, and I don't know if like people are going to want to, I mean, because it has all those things, but I'm hoping that people get out of it is the core that like you get through it together. You know what I mean? Like, I think a big thing in the book is that there's people that like, oh, that's when the world ended, but like it didn't end. Like, we're here with each other, having to do this. And obviously, you know, like, I think I wanted to be really conscious of that, of just like that, you know, I feel like there's, you know, I feel like really self-conscious of, I mean, it was the first book I've written, so I'm self-conscious of that. But also I think the thing that was on my mind, and I, you know, kind of want to ask you about it too, because I'm really interested in the way you handle it, but it's like world building. And just like, is my world building good enough? And that was actually something that, you know, what was interesting is when I first came up with the idea for this book, it was honestly in 2012, and I pitched it to Callista for a second, and it got rejected because just like the world building isn't there. It's just not like, you know, I appreciate it and there's some good stuff, but it's just not there. And, you know, I was like heartbroken, but I was also like, she's totally right. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't quite there yet. And it was something that I kind of took the time to work on. And then when it was ready and, you know, Oni picked it up, I think I had fixed that. And I still feel like, again, it's a little softer world building. I can get really into sort of the like thinking too much about it and trying to problem solve it. But, you know, and I think, you know, it serves its purpose for the story. But I think really it's just like, I want to create like a sense of the world. And then I want these kids to kind of be up kind of against that, and just showing that it's like, it's community, it's the kindness of people you know, you love, kindness with strangers, just like that the only way that we survive anything is by caring about one another. And you know, I mean, that seems like such a simple, obvious moral or idea, right? But now it's like, it's crazy how, like, you know, which writer, I don't know if you've if you've read any Karen Thompson Walker, but she's like one of my favorite authors. And she does these like speculative fictions that are very like slow burn, and it's about like the slow collapse of society. Like one is about the world's turn stops, it slows down. And just like, it's about this like teenage girl's experience of society collapsing as like how all these little, and she's just so good at world building like that. And then her newest book, her last book, it's not new at this point, was called The Dreamers. And it's crazy because it's like, it's about these people that get this sickness, the sleeping, that basically they fall asleep and they don't wake up, and how it spreads in this like town in Northern California. And I'm just like, we're living in like a poorly written Karen Thompson Walker novel, like, but just like, who would have thought that like the downside, like the collapse of society is based off like, can you care about somebody else? Can you make the decisions because of that? But but it does kind of make me want to ask you the question of like, I think that, seeing how I approach world building and just seeing so many similarities in our book, is I kind of want to maybe ask you about how you approach that world building and how you thought about that. Because you talked about how you had this like, oh, here's this idea I have, like it's going to start with big people and normal sized people, and then you kind of reverse engineer it from that. And but I think something that I loved about Titan is that it is like, I feel like it's really easy to access, and I think this is something I love about comics. But it's really easy to access, and it's not like, there's not a lot of exposition, but it's just like, you let us experience the world and like feel the world as you read it. And like more and more details come up as you read it, and it just feels so fully realized for some, it's in the future, there's all these high concepts, but again, it feels really grounded. Like, can you how did you come up with that, or how did you kind of solve that problem?
Well, for me, number one, I'm glad that it feels full, because in some ways, because I've had a couple people ask me that question, and it surprised me when I think about it, because I realized it's actually like kind of fluid, there's a lot of like details aren't tacked down, like I don't get into like the precise socioeconomic, like how does the economy of the future run and things like that. And so what I like to do is I like to kind of like create a world where it's almost like setting a stage, or where you're filming something, right? You want it to look realistic, like at first glance and at first read, and maybe at second and third read. And then maybe the audience can finally see through and say, oh, like maybe, is this realistic? Is this not realistic? Is this something that feels off? But their initial feeling is one of like, it's a full world. I get get where this is all happening. And then sometimes I think that there's something to be said for just leaving a little bit to the reader's imagination, like just to say, oh, okay, like, what are these, like, what are the battles in space in the world of Titan like? I don't tell you, like I don't tell the reader. And I've had a couple readers say, like, oh, I wish I had more details, more story, more things and that. And I think that's super valid reading. But in a way, I like it if there's a little bit of ambiguity, if there's a little bit of just space, you see something maybe in the background, or, and that's one of the reasons why I think, I mean, we're both working in the graphic novel format. And I think that that's one of the benefits of the format that we're working in, right? Is that you don't have to describe everything. Like if we were both writing like novelists, we would have to like say a certain amount about like what the room looks like or something like that. But instead, when you just are sort of drawing it, you kind of like put in all these ideas, details, kind of background things in the environment. And I remember that was one of I tried not to do too many to mess with my story too much, because the book actually came out in French first in 2017, so it's been 3 years since it came out. And I was very tempted, and I did do some little tweaks. I did some new pages, and I did some other little tweaks in the book itself. But one of the major things I did is I just drew more backgrounds. I drew more environments. I drew more like things in the background, more characters in the background. And for me, and I think I definitely responded to this in your book too, and to a lot of books, is I think that that's something that sometimes is overlooked by the author, because, you know, like, we're all cartoonists, so we're trying to do things with a minimum of line and expression, because you don't want to lose the reader sometimes, and sometimes you can lose the reader if you're putting too much detail in the background, and so it's a fine line. It's we have to find the right space, but I like to put in a little bit extra into the background, because I think that helps with that world building, right? Like, maybe it's not necessarily like you know, like the guide, the spacefarer's guide to the world of Titan, the role-playing game, you know, where it's all like, you know, like tells you exactly like how big the town is, and like, you know, who's the mayor and everything like that. But at least you see it a little bit. I mean, it's kind of like in your version of, I think is it San Francisco that they're in, or
yeah,
like, yeah. And it's like I lived in San Francisco for 9 years, and I feel like I can see it, like I can sense the kind of like the background of the city there, but then it's been transformed and changed, and you can get so much just by having the characters in the background, just by like how people are dressing, what the fashion is, how they're interacting with each other. I think you have a lot also with like kind of like, you know, like what people are eating, or what people are like buying from each other, buying and selling, and like the way that the market is working. And I think that's all like something that's really rich. And that's also one of the reasons why I like science fiction, right? Is because we, you know, as graphic novelists, we're like, or cartoonists, we're like kind of like the director of the film, but we're the writer of the film, but we're also like all the actors and the casting director. We're like the background designer, the location scout, the prop master, all those things. And so it's kind of, I don't know, for me, it's like really fun. You can kind of like for the world building, it's like, there's no limit, but there's a limit to your time. So you just have to decide like where you can kind of put more or less in, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think, no, I love all of that, and I agree with all of that. And I think it's interesting too, because I think I was super self-conscious of maybe putting too much. And as I was working on Odessa, just like, am I overdrawn? Like I'd finish the page sometimes, I'm like, oh, that's overdrawn. Like, I kind of wish I would have simplified more, but you know, I'm also someone that's like, I just like, you know, this is such a long, it's a marathon, and it's just like, I'm not going to go back and fix anything. I'm just going to try to be conscious of it the next page, or fix it the next page. But I think something that you kind of brought up that I'm, you know, kind of interested in talking about and asking about is like, I think my favorite thing about comics is that it really is dealing with the space the things that aren't shown. You know what I mean? Like we're talking, you know, you've talked a lot about like what it's like to be a writer, you know what I mean? Like, and when we read novels, and then we have like film and television when we're given a lot of the stuff. And I think my favorite thing about comics is that it is literally in between the spaces, because the gutter is where the reader is putting all the information together, and also the fact that it's a visual medium. But again, we have to be, you know, we want to work smart and not hard. And, you know, like a good cartoonist isn't someone that draws fully detailed panels everywhere. And so, you know, just also just thinking about like how you work, how you tell your story. And also what I really want to ask, because I think this is kind of the most obvious, like sort of like similarity, as someone looks at the covers of both of those books, or looks at the pages of both of those books. It's like there's a very clear choice for a spot color, black. Yeah. And like, can you talk about like sort of, I guess you work, like, how do you make like making those decisions? Like, what do you show? What don't you show? You know, you talked about adding backgrounds, but like, what was the choice for a spot color? Is it involved in sort of like, I guess, how do you work in the spaces that people don't see or don't exist? That feels like very kind of like hoity-toity or pretentious, but it's like, I think it's really true to comics, you know?
No, but I mean, that, you know, and I thought this when I was reading Odessa, is that because you teach at PNCA, you teach comics, right? And like you can tell, because it's very mannered, like the way that you're putting all the page together, the way the page turns are. You also draw, like, I think almost like, I would say nearly 100% of the book is like on like a 9-panel grid or something like that. Yeah. And you know, I think maybe it might be, I don't know how old you are, but I feel like it may be kind of connected with like our generation, like what books we were reading when we were younger. Yeah. And you know, so like just the thing you're saying about the gutter, right? Like, I think there was a very formational impact on our generation of reading Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, right? And I think that taught us a lot about like that space, the space for the reader, like in between the gutter, and like I really embraced that. And I think it was also in maybe a little bit in rebellion against you know, some of the like mainstream comics that were coming out when we were younger, which I was totally a fan of. You know, I was a huge fan of X-Men and you know, like the art of Jim Lee and things like that. But it was all extremely like maximalist, right? Like there's like a ton of like cross hatching. There's a ton of like detail in everything and like the characters' expressions, their faces. There's like a real like desire to approach realism, right? And for me, like when I was exposed to more kind of indie stuff or alternative stuff, like say Daniel Clowes, who was doing, you know, something like say Ghost World, which is also a spot color book, and that like kind of like there's a lot of realism in it, and there's like an attention to detail. It's not like cartooning in the sense of, you know, like Heathcliff or something like that, where it's just like these like or Ivan Brunetti or something like that, where there's these iconic figures moving around. But for me, it's like I really like the human form. I like realistic backgrounds. I like, you know, like I'm definitely coming at it from the background where I was reading, you know, Wildcats by Jim Lee and like looking at all those little details and loving all those details. But then I found like I really liked that kind of like when you pare it back a little bit and you can see a little bit more of where each line is a little bit more intentional. Like I won't lie and say that like every line I do, like I'm thinking about like the exact way that it's going to be. Like I'm pretty sloppy as an artist in many ways, but I like it when there's like there's a minimal amount of information on the page. And the same thing applies to the spot color, because I like working in color. I work as a professional illustrator, and so I'll do a magazine cover or something like that. And I work in color all the time, and I have like my way of doing that, and I like the way my color work looks. But there's something to me, I think, that is almost overwhelming about full color in comics. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like it gets in the way sometimes of just reading. You know, like because like there's that dichotomy of like you're looking at something or you're reading something, and you know, like, and comics fall in the spectrum between those things, right? Like the words in a novel, you're reading them, right? Like you're not paying like we figured out how a way to make the person not pay too much attention to the letters in a book most of the time, unless the designer really wants them to. But with comics, you're somewhere between that and like a painting, where you really want like the person to just look at it and absorb it in a visual sort of sense. I think if you stop to look at a panel for too long, then you lose the thread of the story a little bit, like the beats and the thing. And so that's what, you know, cartoonists like you and I are we're always trying to find that balance, right? Like that balance between like too much information, not enough information, too much detail, not enough detail. And then, you know, the same thing with color, like color applies. It's really funny. Like we both they're a little bit different, but we both happen to choose like a pink color for our book. How did you pick that? Like, number one, like, how did you pick that color? And number two, like, what do you feel about like spot color, and why is that interesting to you?
Yeah, I think, well, I guess the thing for me is the spot color is it, because it's interesting too, because I think we must be around the same age. I think we're of the same generation of cartoonists, and it is interesting to see sort of like, you know, us having similar influences. It seems like be exposed to the same thing and have sort of a similar reaction in our art. But I think for me, I mean, the color is a thing where it's just like, I mean, I do illustration too. That's definitely more of a side thing than the comic stuff that I do. But I think for me, like it's actually just like it's actually like a physical hindrance. Like I'm actually colorblind. Red and or greens and oranges look almost exactly the same. So like in I don't think it's the same in newer Photoshops, but in the old Photoshop, you'd have the swatch open and there'd be like the orange, the yellow, and the green. And the orange and the green look exactly the same to me. And when I was starting working digitally and starting my illustration career, you know, I'd have work and my roommates would be like, are they all like, just so you know, they're all green, man, you know, and because I was trying to give them more of like an orangey tone to like, you know, make them, and so it's like I have to do, like working digitally, I can do a check, and I still do that for my illustration work. I do color my own illustration work, but it's not a strength of mine. And so I think it's just an example of like style kind of being, it's like doing something. I think there's a couple reasons. I think there's that practical reason. And I also think that I like it because I think it exists. It like, and I think I was, you know, really influenced when I was in school, kind of towards the end of my school. And I think Kevin Huzenga was just making his and I was like, huge, he was like a huge influence on me in terms of like how he uses time and just kind of the, like how much you can maximize a spot color. Like, it's not just like black and a spot color. It's like you can halftone screen the spot color to now get a light version of that color. You can to put a halftone screen over the spot color to get a darker version of that color. And so, you know, I don't think, you know, I teach students, they don't think about this stuff now, but it's like thinking about like, oh, if I'm printing a book, I'm only having to print 2 plates. And I'm getting the most out of those 2 plates that I'm having the printer make. But also I think it is something about like comics existing in that halfway point of like, I can use the spot color to show light or form or and like drama when I need to, but it goes back to that working smart and not hard. It's like, I don't have to spend all the time doing full color. It's like, I can give folks just enough to like do a stronger sense of the scene. And I think like something I'm not really great at is I'm not really great at spotting blacks and having those big heavy areas, but I love pages that have spot blacks, which I think it's interesting too to just see how the both of us used our spot color. And I think that, you know, something I loved about Titan is I love the work because I love like bold brush stroke, like bold line work is like one of my favorite things. And then the spot blacks, and then just how you really balance the spot blacks with the spot color. And you know, I always appreciate that. And I think for me, it was like, my stuff is more line based, more linear. And it's like, I rely on the spot color because to be honest, I'm a little afraid to put down those heavy spot blacks. And so that's a way for me to just like, it's a problem that has to be solved. I think I tell my students often that I'm just like, man, 90% of comics is problem solving. Like that 10% is that you've done the drawing all your life. But like, if in another world, I was better at real math instead of art math, I probably would have been an engineer, you know?
Right. No, I mean, it's, and I think that's a really good advice to give to anybody who is out there, who's like kind of like getting started with their drawings and everything is like, you have to, you know, we all should be striving to challenge ourselves and like do new things, but then you also have to work with your strengths and weaknesses too. You know, like for me, like a big problem is like, I'm not good at like, you know, I can do it if I need to, but I'm not like really like a natural, like cross hatching or doing like little feathered lines and things like that. And I've done it before, you know, when I was like learning how to draw when I was a teenager and everything, or a kid, I would like sit around and like draw these little feathered lines or like, you know, pencil gradiated things and things like that. But it's just not something that comes natural to me. And so I had to learn how to do something that worked a little bit better. But, and so for a long time I was drawing like that kind of like, everything's really clean. Well, not really clean because I'm like not really that good of an artist, but like a cleaner kind of just black kind of feel, like more of a Jaime Hernandez feel. That's almost sacrilege to say because it doesn't look like Jaime Hernandez.
No, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
But then I really wanted something like that third tone, like something to be able to play with that, like the kind of space. And so for me, the spot color did it. I mean, one time, I mean, the thing is I try not to be too hard on myself either, because one long time ago, I was reading an interview with a cartoonist, Dylan Horrocks, who did Hicksville and a bunch of other stuff, Magic Pen. And he wrote, you know, he wrote about how he was like reading books by like Bluch and other French cartoonists who just like, they can just draw the heck out of anything, you know, like they're just these immaculate illustrators. And he was looking at them and he was saying, gosh, I can't draw like that. I'll never be able to draw like these guys. And then like one day for him, he had this revelation. He was like, well, I can't draw like them, but they can't draw like me. And that changed the whole way I thought. Just it's like it's kind of funny. It just goes to show that like just someone saying something in a little panel or interview in a magazine or something can change, you know, a reader, because that really changed the way I approached art. I was like, oh, I don't have to try and be like other people. I can just kind of try and like figure out what my way is and what the best way is for me to do what I can with what I have, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's what, you know, that's really interesting because like I haven't read that interview, but I think I've kind of come to the same conclusion. Like as I teach comics, as I try to stress that, like there's no right or wrong way. Like I'll give you some guidelines. These are some like this is how storytelling works visually. You know what I mean? Like, but you can like they're not rules, they're guidelines you can play with. And I always try to tell my students, like, I don't want you to draw like this person or them to draw, like, you have to find what works for you. And I think that's how you carve a place out, right? Is remembering that like nobody else can draw like you and nobody else is going to bring just like your experiences. I mean, and it seems like it can seem really kind of like new agey or hippie or whatever, but like it's true. It's like what you're bringing, like it's kind of this amazing feat when you stop and think about it. It's like us as creators, like both of us have created, I'm not trying to get on like an ego trip or anything, but like we created worlds and characters and things that didn't exist. And like anyone that makes art or does comics, like does that. And like, it's like to create in a world that everything is being consumed. It's such a powerful act of kind of defiance, like whether that's unknowingly or not. And so just like, just trying to get people to be like, don't worry about, like, yeah, you can't do that, but look at what you can do. You know what I mean? And like, how special is that and how beautiful that is? And so like, it's, I think, and I think that that's something that comes maybe with age too, is like letting go a little bit and like kind of realizing like, well, this is what I do and I'm just going to double down on it. You know what I mean? And not that we can't always be pushing ourselves. But yeah, it's just really interesting. And I also just realized that I never answered your question on why pink, because I also want to ask you why you picked pink too. And for me, the pink was, I feel like there's a lot of things in my book that fall under these sort of like, like tropes of like post-apocalyptic fiction or things like that. But I think there was something that I really wanted was I didn't want it to be like brown or gray or green or just have this drabness to it. And I kind of was like, it was kind of this thing that was like, well, and then on a purely technical level, it's like, you want a mid-tone, right? Because you don't want something too dark that's going to look similar to the black. You don't want something too light that is actually not going to read against the white of the page. It's going to get lost amongst that. So you want like a mid-tone. And so I think there was a practical picking of that like pink. But also it's just like, I wanted it completely different from any other, like, I also like playing with this, like, a lot of times these like apocalyptic stories are like macho survival man who's got to like kill everything at all costs. And I was just like, it's this teenage girl and her brothers, like, and I wanted to kind of like invert that sort of like masculine aggressive, like, imagery. And then I also just liked that it was so different from kind of what people might think with a post-apocalyptic story.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. It's like putting a filter on the camera, right? You can like filter the scene in a different way. Same kind of story for me. I mean, because I originally did Titan like online, and so I experimented, like every chapter had a different color, and so I kind of like played with it. And when it came out in French, it's actually purple in the French book. It's like totally different. It has a different feel. And that was like, my editor thought, we kind of came down to a few different color concepts. Because I was sort of flexible with it. It wasn't like there was like my way or the highway, and we came down to different concepts. And with like purple, like it was like kind of like putting a lens that was like, it kind of like suggested like more of like the weirdness of the situation, like kind of like an eerie sort of sci-fi way. And then when it came to the American edition, I went back to what was my very, very first idea, which was like that kind of pink tone, which I think the same kind of thing, like just like your book has like biker gangs and like, and post-apocalyptic violence and things like that, but you want to like have a different kind of tone or feel. My book's about like violence and revolution and like the oppression and things like that, but there's also like sort of like a romantic undertone to it. So that was one of the reasons why I thought like pink sort of worked. Pink is also funny. We don't have to talk about pink forever, but I liked all your thoughts about it. And it's the one other thing I noticed too is that like sometimes if you do like blue or green, like you were saying with like you get like these weird, like you get a weird emotional effect, whereas like pink can kind of like encompass the human experience a little bit better, I think, than sometimes like green might or something like that.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think so, like, I don't know if you've gotten this, but so many people have such a strong reaction to the pink. But it's one of those things where you stop and think that like it's actually way more neutral than people give it, think, like when you stop and think about it. And I also think it's like it just kind of, I think it works in this way for comics too, because comics is about the space that isn't there or what's not being said. But I think it's also about the juxtaposition of things and putting things next to each other and like like putting words and pictures next to each other. And when you do it successfully, it like creates a new context, right? It creates a story that doesn't exist without those two things kind of, and again, this is the roots of Scott McCloud, right? But like, it's the same thing of like the pink and the art. And like, now it exists in this, like, it's funny because now it's like, I'm going to have to look up images for the purple Titan, because like, to me, it's like sort of, it's perfect and it cannot be extracted from that pink. And so I'm really interested to see the pages in a purple and just like how different that feels or what that effect is,
Yeah, no, totally. So you've mentioned a few authors, but just if I can ask you, I mean, it's a little boilerplatey, but I'm quite interested. Like, what authors or illustrators or cartoonists were you looking to for inspiration with this project in particular, or maybe just generally? But like, where were you getting your inspiration from?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think that's like a really hard question that I think even if it is boilerplate, like I never have a good answer for it. Because I would say that if people are like, well, who are the cartoon? Like I could, I feel like there was like a meme going around social media that's like, it was like the DNA of your comics or whatever,
Okay.
And I think, and you put like 4 cartoonists on there and, I can't even remember who, I think it was just this. I don't know that there's like, oh, this is very obviously this is very obviously that. And I'd be interested in hearing your answer to this too, because I think what I like about your stuff is it doesn't come across as like, oh, this is very clearly this and this and this. But, I would say the biggest influence I ever had as, he was my mentor, was Ted Stern, who was he was the cartoonist for Fuzz and Pluck.
Oh
He was
yes,
also,
yeah.
he was he's a storyboard artist. He did Daria and Beavis and Butthead, but he taught at SCAD when I was there. And he just asked that he would ask us questions like, why are you making this? And I'd be like, I'm like 19 and I'm like, like, because you made it something. He's like, no, but like, it's not like, you have to figure that out, and I think, and then just like, and I think folks that I came up with, and again, I think a lot of the folks that we maybe know that I love seeing folks have books come out now, that we came up as zinesters. Those were the people that always, I think, were the biggest influence. And I don't know if this is like a cop-out answer, but, just like seeing folks make zines, and like you only get to see them at zine conventions, and then you trade the zines that you make, and it like inspires you to want to go and keep making your zines and books. And now we have books coming out and we're doing all these great things, and it's like to be on, those are the kind of the biggest influences. And I think just like I'm such a sucker for rules and structure and formality that like that's where my storytelling comes from, is because I grew up like this is the system, this is how storytelling works. And so just to be like, well, I want to try to do that in like the best, most formal way possible, so. And then I think the biggest influence on me just in terms of a single cartoonist is Kevin Huzenga, not because of necessarily his comics, but just like his way of using time.
Mm-hmm.
Was just sort of like, I just love, my biggest thing for me is I just love how he just tells these slice of life stories, but tells them in such a different, interesting way. And I don't know if that comes out in Odessa or anything, or any of my other work, but just like even things just like having time sit and having time move in a way that isn't as clear, but it is clear, but it's not as like linear, like A, B, C, D. It might be like A, B, C, C, D, and just like knowing how to create moments of pause or drama or things like that, I think was probably the biggest influence on me.
Well, I think you see that in Odessa too, because I mean, it won't surprise the author, the readers when they see the book, but it's like 310 pages long, right? And it's and it flows quite long, and you spend a lot of time with the characters, like, and in scenes, it's a book about traveling, and you spend a lot of time on the road, like there's a lot of like the journey is the destination. And I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say like that the journey isn't done at the end of the first book, is it?
No, it's not. So we'll see, how that plays out when it plays out. But yeah, I mean, that was something else too. Is like, I'm working on a book now. I'm an editor. I have, these pages and pages, and my editor's like, yeah, you know what, like, but maybe if you just put later that day. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do it. And then I'm like, but it might save me 2 pages
right.
of drawing. You know what I mean? Like, so I think it's, again, like we were saying, always, how can you work smart and not hard?
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I'll ask you the same question. I know Grace is probably keeping an eye on time for us, and I know we started a little bit later, but I want to be able to ask you too, like, because I'm really interested too, is like, who would you say are your influences? And it could be on Titan or just in general, because I feel like I kind of want to learn more in general, because I feel like that kind of, once you see the roots of that tree, you can kind of see all the branches that are sort of like, that sort of come out.
Right. No, totally. And I mean, like, well, one thing I think, and we brought this up a couple times, so I think people are going to think we're just real old fogies, but like, I think that there's something to be said for like the generational aspect of it. And I think it is really interesting. I think a lot of people like in our generation did a lot of like small press publishing, small press comics, zines, mini comics, did like all this small press shows and things like that. And I think that like we're starting to see books come out from a lot of our peers, like, you know, with like bigger publishing houses that are getting bigger releases. And it's sort of compounding it now, you know, like where, you know, like say somebody like Jason Shiga, he's been like in that kind of like professional milieu, that like making really big books that you know, but then I think you kind of see it like the connections with like other people who lived in different towns, like the people you probably went to the Savannah College of Art and Design, like the people who you went to school with, the people from Portland, things like that. Just seeing them is always just a big inspiration. And then definitely I was inspired a little, you know, I mean, a lot of like the people who I've read the most and who I go back to and read again and again are people who I was reading in like kind of the formative years for me, which was like in the 90s when I was a teenager and young adult. And I was reading like things like, you know, like Jeff Smith, who's doing Bone, you know, Paul Pope, Jaime Hernandez, who is doing Locas, you know, like, and then even people who like it's not like I look at their book every day anymore or anything like that, but it's funny how often I think about like the way that someone like, say, like Debbie Dreschler, who did Summer of Love, and she did with like her works also in spot color. And I think that was like one of my early exposures to those ideas of like you were saying, like the printmaking aspect of it, where you can kind of layer the colors and get different tones and things like that. Or you know, like even like kind of funny books, like, you know, like one of my books that I keep going back to, like I recently like sold almost all my stuff because I moved from Portland to Canada, and it's funny to see the maybe 10 comic books that I kept after all that. And like what some of them are like kind of surprising. I would be like you know, totally surprised that this was like a book that I read all the time, but there's like a Grendel Devils and Death spin-off story by Edvin Bukovic, who passed away tragically when he was really young. And I'm like, why is it that this speaks to me so much? Like, but there must have been something formative when I read it in my teens, and it taught me something about like the way that we read comics and write comics, and so that's always just been an influence on me. It's strange. It's strange.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's an interesting like thought experiment of like, if I could only save 10 books from my library, which ones would I save, and for what reasons would I save them? You know, that's, I'm going to be thinking about that for, I think, like the rest of the day.
It's a helpful process to go through, both theoretically and actually like in real life. It's not a bad thing to do. So
yeah.
Well, I think we are just about at the hour, and so maybe I'll just like ask the classic, like, what are you working on now? You said you were working on another book, and then also there's going to be a sequel to Odessa. Like, what's your plate look like for the next year or two?
So you know, I think so. Right now, actually, I signed 2 books with Candlewick and Walker. Walker's their graphic novel imprint, and I'm working with Susan Van Meter, who is the editor for Dylan McConus's Queen of the Sea and CC Bell's El Defo, and so it's a middle reader science. It's science fiction. Again, it's kind of rooted, but it's about this family of lizard people that have to flee under the earth and live amongst humans, and it's sort of a metaphor for like the refugee experience and not fitting in and having to like kind of suppress your way of life to try to fit into America, and in a place that doesn't see you amongst all the media and everything kind of like villainizing you. So that's kind of what I'm working on next. And so that's where, you know, I think that there is a, you know, Odessa 2 is, you know, it's on the back burner for now while I'm kind of working for that. But so that's what I'm working on. And so what about you? What's on your plate right now?
Well, I'm working on 2 things right now. One, I'm not going to talk about it too much, but I'll say the title because my editor Grace said it in the intro, so I feel like I can say it. But I'm drawing a monthly comic series that'll start next year in 2021 called Orcs in Space, which is totally different than Titan. It's still science fiction, but like comedy sci-fi, so a totally different feel. But that'll be that's like really interesting because that's like my bread and butter now. It's a monthly comic, so it's like a totally different pace. I have to just crank pages out. And that I'm really excited about, because like that's how I came to comics, right? Was through
the monthly, yeah. I feel like that's kind of maybe everyone who grew up on, you know, you can't see the influence on that, you know, those Jim Lee X-Men or things like that. But like, there's something so interesting too, I think, about like telling a story serially. And like, you know, again, there's so many formal elements that like, I have to say I'm a little bit jealous of that. I'm excited to read it. Like, I'm excited to check it out and to see what you do with it.
It's totally wild. It feels like it came full circle. Like sometimes I think about my 13-year-old self and I'd be like, that's so weird. You're doing like like this comic that comes out every month. And so that's what I'm working on all the time. And then now I'm also in the early stages of another like graphic novel that I'll be doing, which is like another kind of like what you said, it's another science fiction thing. It's like in the same kind of wheelhouse with Titan. Same sort of thing where that is, it's going to be like, it's like a critique of, you know, the capitalist system and all that good stuff. And it's going to be called Blue Moon, and I'm just starting on that. So we'll see when that one gets done. But my goal is to have it come out a little bit faster. You know, that's always our goal, is to be working faster, right?
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you both so much for doing this panel with us. I'm so excited to hear from both of you about these books. I'm so excited for readers to get their hands on these in just a few weeks. What are some things that readers can expect from you in these next few weeks before the book's release? Are there any things that they should keep their eye out for? Anything like that in the next 2 weeks before the books come out?
Like events wise? Sorry, like, or just like in general?
Sure. Anyway.
I know that I'm
hard to do this during the COVID times.
Yeah, I guess, like, you know, well, I'm kind of working. I guess this would be the first. Like, I'm working with a friend because I also grew up a big influence. We talk a lot about comics influences, but like I grew up as like a board gamer or like a tabletop gamer, and I grew up playing Magic and role-playing games and things like that. And so like I'm working with my friend who did the art. He helped me do the art prep and stuff to save me some time. We're kind of working on a loose role-playing game for it that's just like quick. You know, like this is the first time I'm actually mentioning it because I'd rather have more of it done than I would like, but we're kind of hoping to get it done by the time Odessa comes out, and it'll be a fun, free thing for people to play. That I think it's a fun way to me sort of work, like unwind on a project that's really like fun and, you know, just different than like working, like when you have a deadline or something, it's like, it's totally different to work on something that's just kind of for fun. So I don't know. I think I was going to tell Katie and Tara that but like, that's something I think that I'm working on, and I'm doing a couple events. I'm doing an event with the author Lisa Coe, who wrote The Leavers, which is my favorite book of the last 5 years. It's just incredible. And I cannot believe that she said yes to this, because there's a lot of similarities. Like hers is like an adult, like, you know, literature book, but it's about like a mother who leaves, but it's because she's taken from ICE or by ICE and things like that. And just like, I'm really excited to have that conversation with her. That's on November 25th at Powell's. And I'm also doing the Portland Book Fest. I'm doing a panel with Kiku Hughes, whose Displacement, I think, was her book. So anyway, I'm really excited for that. So those are kind of the events that I have coming up, and then I'll let Francois kind of talk. Sorry.
Oh, no. All those events and the role-playing game all sound much cooler than anything I've got cooking. So, I'm doing like, because, you know, normally I was planning it like before we landed in a pandemic, you know, I was like, oh, I'll do a book tour on the West Coast, and I'll go like visit with all these places that I used to live, because like I live in Montreal, and like I have friends here, you know, but it's like I grew up in the United States and lived in the United States most of my life, so I'm very far away from everybody. So I definitely am feeling that, like, the kind of distance that's been imposed by the pandemic. So I don't have any, like, you know, like the major plans. I think we're doing the official release with the Librairie Drawn and Quarterly here in Montreal, so that'll be really fun, and that's going to be like a sort of a virtual release event. And then I'm also just doing like lots of little podcasts and video things, and those are going to start trickling in. I've already recorded a few of them, which is always fun, because it's like doing this one, you know. It's like you get to connect with people, you know, either podcast hosts or also like other cartoonists, illustrators, designers, and like, you know, just kind of learn about like how to present your work, and also like what other people are doing. So that's kind of my generalized thing, you know, like kind of poking those out from my little bunker where here I am.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you both so much for doing this. I hope you both are getting really excited for your book releases coming up. And thank you so much for sharing all this with us. I feel like I know both of you and both of your books so much better, and I can't wait for folks to get their hands on these.
Thanks, Grace. It's
Thank
so
you,
nice
Grace.
being here.
Yeah, thank you both so much.
Okay.
Have a good day.
Yeah. Bye.